Afternoon and evening, or wherever you may be. Welcome to this presentation, Uncomfortable Knowledge Toward a Pedagogy of Reflexivity. My name is Benedict Singleton. I'm an Associate Professor at Malmö University in Sweden. The talk I'm going to give to you today is summarising an article that was published in Teaching Anthropology this year called Clumsy Learning Toward a Pedagogy of Reflexivity. In this article, myself and my co-authors, explore why anthropologists avoid discussing awkward field encounters, and then also discuss how such interactions can lead to reflexive insight. We then call on anthropologists to recognize the role of uncomfortable knowledge in reflexive learning and thus pedagogies of reflexivity. Now, this is not specifically about conservation, but I think that many of the insights are actually of relevance to conservationist practitioners as well. And hopefully we can also discuss this when we all meet later in this POLLEN conference. So what is reflexivity? It's a keystone concept within anthropology, and one definition of it refers to it as the process of critical self-reflection on one's biases, theoretical predispositions, preferences, and so forth. It is something that is important at all stages of any research process, from the initial planning stages to the final evaluation. And I would argue that it is of relevance for any conservation activity as well. After all, it's an important question in any environmental or conservation intervention is what is it that should be conserved? And then what are the assumptions upon which any given intervention or activity stands? These are always worthwhile things to reflect upon. However, despite reflexivity being a central concept of anthropology, there has been actually very little written about it. It's generally sort of expected to be something that one learns through observation as osmosis, through encounters with other anthropologists or through reading other anthropological works. It is thus somewhat black box. However, in the writing that has emerged on it, there is an increasing focus on the emotional and embodied aspects of research practice, and this is something in our article we also draw attention to. In particular, we focus on the role of embarrassment and discomfort in research practice. So this whole sort of article is sort of rooted in sort of an interest or wonderment in a way at the magical transformation that seems to occur to all of us researchers in the field. So at the beginning, we find ourselves there, we're clueless, we're a fish out of water, an idiot abroad or whatever. We get sick and tired of being in the field, we get discomforted and out of our depth. And we sort of come across often as a clumsy oaf, much to our interlocutors' embarrassment. However, when we come home and start writing up, this sort of messy picture transforms into sort of clear analytical points where we were always professional and rigorous in data collection. We become scientists, experts, and sometimes even advocates for people. And of course, this is not just a personal choice. One has to present oneself in this way if one is to have research outputs. Peer review does not smile upon messiness. So in our article, we sort of describe several consequences for this, in our opinion. Sort of we feel that it amounts at times to a professional denial of reality. We sort of, in official anthropology, we sort of pretend that the emperor has clothes on the whole time. It also has the consequence that students who are expected to learn about reflexivity through reading and discussing monographs seldom get the full picture, to the detriment of the messy sides of lived fieldwork experience, encounters, and relationships, to quote Spencer. This can also be linked, in our eyes, to self-doubt and worry about the professionalism. When one is in the field, one always feels that one is not living up to that ideal of the perfect researcher, the perfect scientist. It can also lead to unreadiness for discomfort or surprises that ensue. And I think also a failure often to understand the purpose of certain things one does in research. I think a classic is a tendency perhaps to fetishize, for example, written consent as the best way of gauging consent or doing ethical research in every single situation. And this can then lead to issues with the research practice. So within our article, we collect uncomfortable learning in an instance in the field for pedagogical reasons. We draw upon our own experiences in this regard. We argue for the reflexive and analytical harnessing of moments when things go wrong in the field, when people react to the anthropologist's clumsiness and one feels overwhelmed by awkward and uncomfortable sensations. We argue that these moments can be approached analytically. Inappropriateness and awkwardness exist in concrete social contexts, and as social scientists, we can examine them. They allow us to, as the practitioner, to see ourselves through others' eyes. So we use this term uncomfortable knowledge, and in our article, we define this as information that challenges our implicit and explicit understandings of a given situation and our roles in it. In the cases we describe, the examples in our paper, our initial assumptions about what a situation was were elegant. And elegant ethnography clearly expresses a specific analytic understanding of the group or phenomenon under study. The author intentionally eschews and excludes a multitude of alternative interpretations and arguments that could be applied, working to convince readers that the particular theoretical apparatus and narrative is productive and even the right interpretation. However, uncomfortable knowledge entails the realization that interactions with interlocutors were oversimplified and partial, at least in the analyst or the anthropologist's initial understanding. Also, in all the cases we mentioned, they were uncomfortable at the time. However, they gave rise to new understandings of the field and who we were in our fieldwork social relationships, moving reflexivity beyond a cognitive and intellectual process to engage the body and emotions. In essence, we were able to get a better knowledge of the situation we were in by having our elegant assumptions challenged by the empirical reality. So these terms, elegance and clumsiness that I'm using now, they come from the theory of socio-cultural viability, often called cultural theory, which is by Michael Thompson and other collaborators. The theory of socio-cultural viability proposes there are 4 ideal types of social organization, none of which are thought to exist in the world in a pristine state. These support 4 distinctive epistemologies. So we sort of take from this that the key implication is that people belonging to different forms of solidarity depart from different premises about how things work, which are anchored in their specific modes of social organization. Each way of organizing and perceiving distills certain elements of experience and wisdom that are missed by the others. Each way of organizing and perceiving provides a clear expression of the way in which a significant proportion of the populace feels when we should live with one another and with nature. When one perspective dominates, the result is elegant but partial. However, interactions between social solidarities also have the potential to yield greater detail in understanding, enhanced representation of diversity, and more responsive action. This is because each solidarity's narrative contains unique knowledge missed by the others. Put another way, because any model of messy reality is partial, there is always residual information. Different perspectives will have different residuals of knowledge, as the whole can never be fully grasped within an elegant framing. So within this cultural theory, by creating institutions receptive and responsive to the knowledge of different social solidarities, elegant situations become clumsier and can produce better understandings, and more appropriate actions. An overly elegant understanding of a situation is liable to be destabilized when information beyond its paradigmatic limits breaks through, producing uncomfortable knowledge, which, given responsive institutions, can lead to clumsy solutions. Now, in our article, we do not utilize the whole schema of this. We don't apply this concept of social solidarity. However, what we take from this is that there are different sort of normative standpoints on the world. And then when these come in when knowledge from a different normative standpoint comes in, it can cause, it can elucidate clumsy learning based on the fact that uncomfortable knowledge, uncomfortable to the elegant paradigm that the researcher was utilizing, comes in. So in our sort of take on this, awkwardness, embarrassment, and emotions such as anger are marked moments when the anthropologist's elegant and partial understanding was challenged by views and practices deriving from positions grounded in different principles. In our article, by describing these experiences in detail, we show how uncomfortable knowledge has the potential to enable reflexive learning in which our analytical and theoretical models were disrupted by information previously invisible to us. So I'm not going to go into huge amounts of depth about the different anecdotes. I'm just going to read one of the anecdotes that we have in our text to give you a sense of flavour for what we mean. So this is one of my own personal anecdotes based on some fieldwork I was doing 3 years ago. So Like many social scientists, much of my work is based on an epistemological perspective of the basic equality of all humanity and a commitment to the dissolution of inequities. Of course, whether I do this is another matter. A silly presumption with this on my part is that most marginalised people share a similar commitment to social justice. A particular case shook me as I lost my composure with a key interlocutor during my work on migration and integration in Sweden. I will not give precise details as I wish my interlocutor to remain anonymous. To summarise, I was chatting over lunch with the interlocutor, someone who had fled conflict and now works in integration projects, and another immigrant. Conversation turned to the coming elections, and the interlocutor explained that he intended to vote for the far-right populist party, the Sweden Democrats. Immediately, I felt the blood rushing to my cheeks, and a heated argument ensued. My interlocutor said that the influx of Muslim immigrants was Sweden's biggest contemporary societal issue, and only Sweden Democrats were prepared to take action. This surprised and angered me. I had assumed the interlocutor's job, and more lazily, his own traumatic background would make him more sympathetic to the plight of many Muslim refugees. Furthermore, the interlocutor seemed completely unconcerned with many other issues that I articulated about the Sweden Democrats, whom I consider to be dishonestly, callously, and dangerously undermining many of the foundations upon which Swedish society and democracy are based. Put another way, keeping Muslims out was more important to the interlocutor than maintaining democratic and social norms. In his eyes, I was naive. Once I had calmed down, I was able to analyze the situation. The interaction's emotional tone clearly indicated the appearance of uncomfortable knowledge. The event revealed the overly elegant framing I had been making of this situation, concealing what were arguably racist and definitely ignorant assumptions about my interlocutors. Many people around the world live in societies where social difference and inequality are givens, closely woven into the social fabric. Likewise, many people live lives as best they can in iniquitous, undemocratic contexts, and necessarily some people benefit more or less than others in these situations. I now realize it is absurd to imagine that simply crossing a national border will instantly transform someone into a passionate pro-democracy advocate with a commitment to the emancipation of society. Furthermore, when coming from conflict situations, persecuted people may be willing to burn the bridges that facilitated their arrival rather than allowing perceived enemies to arrive, no matter the cost. This was deeply uncomfortable to me, involved as I was in an academic project rooted in the fundamental equality of humanity. More broadly, this incident feeds into concerns I have regarding the methodological limitations of equality-based perspectives in a world where many people are perfectly happy with caste, gender, and class differences. The elegant assumption that everyone actually regards egalitarianism as a utopia, or that people mean the same thing with egalitarianism, cannot withstand the encounter between different worldviews. So, in our article, the conclusion sort of goes like this. Anthropological research should be clumsy rather than elegant in aspiration, seeking to consider social and political processes from a variety of normative viewpoints. Many disciplines embrace elegance as well. Perhaps conservation should also acknowledge elegance's limitations. That's something we can discuss, perhaps. We contend that developing pedagogies of reflexivity requires greater openness about uncomfortable knowledge. Awkward encounters are not just for the conference bar. Key to this is attentiveness to emotions. Do not disregard them. Track their flow. If encountering discomfort, ask oneself what made the situation unsettling from one's own and other participants' standpoints. So, as a final thought point, we came up with these 4 recommendations. One should include uncomfortable knowledge in data collection. Writing and recording unpleasant things is part of the reflexive learning process. Observe and interrogate one's discomfort, even though it's not fun. One should incorporate the concept of uncomfortable knowledge into teaching. Don't just keep these stories off the record. Discomfort is a site yielding reflexive learning potential. Field interactions and relationships are not always positive or friendly. They can be a window into deeper knowledge. 3. Take your time. Reflexive learning is a process of coming to know. It may take a while to get to the bottom of discomforted feelings. One should scrutinize one's presence and return to an instant again. Use an emotional intensity as your guide to opportunities for learning, even if such knowledge is hard-won and slow to develop. Finally, recognize limits. A reality of anthropological research is that one may confront limits to the extent one likes one's interlocutors or is willing to accept their values. Perhaps there is a reason for elegance, even if it is painful to admit. Thus, an important reflexive question is, how far will you go to understand another person, and what compromises to your views and values are you willing to make for this understanding? Thank you very much for listening, and I apologize for the periodic plings. As I said before, this is just a summary of the paper Clumsy Learning Toward a Pedagogy of Reflexivity, published in Teaching Anthropology. I hope to discuss some of these issues with other POLLEN participants. But otherwise, also feel free to get in touch. I'm always interested in discussing research methodology issues, particularly qualitative research methodology issues. So once again, thank you, and have a nice day, night, week, month, life. Ta-ra.